Hello, my sewing friends. It's Franken pattern. I'm Jen, and this is my sewing room. And I am guilty of often wanting to make something, but not having the pattern and wondering if I can pull it off. I've been Dr. Frankenstein, which, by the way, in the story, did you ever know that Frankenstein is, when we talk about it, we always mean the monster, but in the actual story, it's Dr. Frankenstein who creates the monster. The way he created the monster was he took body parts and kind of put them all together. Well, okay, I didn't do that in here. What I did was saw a pattern that I wanted specifically for this fabric. And I didn't have it. And McCall's patterns were not on sale. Simplicity wasn't on sale. And I thought, what am I going to do? Well, what do I have in my stash? Can I kind of pull pieces from a couple of them and put them together? Yes, I can. I didn't think it was going to work. I really didn't. I was afraid, but it worked. I couldn't believe it when it worked. I wanted this McCall's dress. Well, I looked through and I ran across Simplicity 9329, which is a MimiG pattern. I know I have seen this, is it Talisha from Creativity by T? She made this and it is beautiful. I will link her video up here in the cards. Go check that out because it's really a pretty dress. What I love is the sleeve on that. And I thought, this isn't exactly like the dress that I wanted, but that sleeve, that is some kind of sleeve. That is a statement sleeve. And I fell in love with it. And I thought, okay, well, I still want that dress, but I want it with that sleeve. So I took this sleeve and I put it on this dress. This is Vogue 8508. It's from 2008. And I've made this before, but it's made for knits. And I thought, oh, I don't know if this will work. That's one of the reasons that I didn't know if it would work. I didn't know if this sleeve would fit into this pattern, this dress. So I did some figuring and it took a little while. I probably went to a whole lot more trouble than I needed to, but I ended up with a beautiful, beautiful dress. Here's how I did it. Whenever I trace off a pattern, the first place I start is the grain line. The grain line is essentially the true north of every pattern. Anytime you want to make a change, then the first thing you need to do is make sure that you are on the straight of grain. In this case, the dress front is cut on the fold, so that's my grain line. The largest size on this pattern is a 14. But I wanted to size up because I wanted to account for the ease because this pattern is made for knits. So I decided to measure the distance between the size 12 and the size 14. That was a ½ inch. So then I decided, well, I'll just add a ½ inch all the way around. I went all the way around and just marked that extra ½ inch with dots. Then I just slid my tracing paper down along that grain line, lining it up with the cutting line for the size 14, and then I traced it off. This allowed me to be able to keep the integrity of the design without distorting it. I did the same thing with the side seam. But I didn't just line up the dots with the cutting line. I made sure that grain line was straight also. I wanted to drop the armhole here by about 3/4 of an inch. I did that for two reasons. First off, I had made this dress before and I felt like the armhole was kind of tight. And secondly, I wanted to make sure that I accounted for that new sleeve that was a little bit bigger than the armhole opening. So again, I just slid it down and made sure that my grain line was lined up and then drew the armhole in. Because I normally drop the bust dart by about an inch, I didn't need to do that because I'd already dropped the armhole by 3/4 of an inch. So that worked out fine. And another common adjustment I always make whenever I'm dealing with a bust dart is to shorten them by an inch. So I did that and then just went ahead and drew in the dart as it was marked on the pattern. After that, it was just a matter of tracing off the other pattern pieces, making sure I made those 1/2 inch adjustments to enlarge it, and dropping that armhole on the back piece by 3/4 of an inch. You can see that the sleeve here is too wide for the fabric, so I just decided I would go ahead and cut that on the cross grain. This left me just enough fabric to be able to cut bias strips for the sleeves and also for the neckline. I have several pocket templates, so I pulled out my side seam pocket and I cut 4 of those, cutting them a little bit bigger than the template. First up, it was time to join all those bias strips together. Then I stitched the bust darts. After that, it was time to pinch and pin all those little pleats up and down the sides of the sleeves. So I did that, and then I went over and I ran a basting stitch down just to hold them down. While I was over there, I decided I would run 2 lines of gathering stitches, basting stitches at the bottom of the sleeve so I could gather it into the binding. And I also turned the top of the sleeve under and stitched a casing for the elastic. I did this elastic insertion a couple of ways because I had a couple of little notions on hand. The first was a loop turner. This was so easy because all I had to do was put it through the casing and then hook the elastic onto the end and then pull it through really fast. I thought I'd show you the other way I sometimes thread elastic through. I use a bodkin. A bodkin is essentially a pair of tweezers that you grab onto the end of your elastic, and then it has a little ring that when you slide it down, it tightens that grip, the pinch of the tweezers basically. And this works great if you have a really long casing because that bodkin is pretty big. It's bigger than a safety pin to grab a hold of. I had to fiddle with this just a little bit, but once I got it going, it was fine. Both the loop turner and the bodkin are really inexpensive notions that it's always nice to have on hand because especially the loop turner is good for when you have to turn a strap, a narrow piece of binding, you need to turn it inside out. That's a good way to do it. Once the elastic casings were done, I went to the binding that goes on the bottom of the sleeve. So the first thing I did was fold down 1/2 inch on one side of each binding, and then I took it over to the machine and I stitched the ends together so that it formed a circle. After that, I stitched the side seams of the sleeves. Once the side seams were stitched, I took the sleeves back over and then attached the binding, adjusting the gathers at the bottom of the sleeve, finding the centers, matching right sides together. Then I went over and stitched these down. Whenever I sew in a circle, I sew on the inside of the circle. And in this case, I did it so that the gathers were up so that I could adjust those as I went. And after that, then I went over turned the binding to the inside, and then stitched it down, securing it by stitching into the ditch. Then it was time to do the center back seam. I'd started about 4 inches from the top and left myself an opening because I wasn't sure that this thing was going to go over my head. After I stitched it, then I just went in and folded the seam line under twice and then top stitched it. After that, it was just time to sew the pockets on. So I did that, and then I understitched the pockets. Then it was time for the side seams. As I was stitching the side seams, once I came down and got to the pocket, the top of the pocket, that part is squared off, and I wanted more of a teardrop shape. So I just angled it down and stitched it like that, knowing that when I went in and finished the seams with my serger, it would get trimmed off. Once the side seams were done, it was time to address the neckline. The pattern calls for a facing, but I didn't want to do that because of the way that this sleeve has elastic at the top, and that forms part of the neckline. So I just treated this with binding the same way I did the sleeves. Once the neckline was finished, then it was time to hope and pray that these sleeves were going to fit inside this armhole opening. I had a lot of ways to adjust it if it didn't, but fortunately it did. It worked beautifully. When I sewed the seams, they're kind of a circle, so again, I sewed them on the inside of the circle. The last thing was to make some little ties to close up that keyhole neckline in the back, and I just cut a couple of bias strips that were left over, tied them on the ends so we didn't have to finish them, and then attach them in the back. Once those were done, I put a 1-inch hem on the bottom, and my dress was finished. So what do you think? It's not Frankenstein's monster, it's Jen's Franken pattern. And it turned out beautifully. I am so glad it did because I had this Ankara fabric and it has a lot of purple in it. And number one, I wanted the fabric to really shine, which is why I chose this particular silhouette, this dress. And number two, it has a lot of purple in it, and I wanted to make something for the Sew Purple for ALZ challenge that Michelle from Michelle Sews Again is hosting on Instagram. It's a fundraiser to raise awareness and money for Alzheimer's. So I got a beautiful dress. And I'm so happy to have been able to use this Ankara and have it really shine, because I'm telling you what, these sleeves are something. They are something. And it fits perfectly. Using the pattern and enlarging it like I did, you know, going up a size, really afforded me the ease that I needed. And this is a dress that isn't really a tent dress. When you look at this pattern, you kind of get the impression that it's like this big tent. And it's really not. It's fitted through the bust line and almost down into the waist, and then it flares out, and it's so flattering, and I love it. I'm completely in love with this dress. So let me know if you have ever Franken patterned that. Have you ever just kind of piecemealed different patterns together to get what you want, and did it turn out? Let me know. Let's talk about all that in comments, and if you would like to see another time that I Franken patterned a t-shirt, then have a look right here, and I will see you next time. Thanks for watching.